Well, good day there, everybody. Welcome back. This video is about a failure. This is the folding pocket Kodak 1A autographic camera. It is an old camera from the early 20th century, and it was given to me by a member of the New Mexico Film Photographers. And I was hoping to be able to use this camera with paper negatives. The film format is no longer made, and I really was kind of interested in a paper negative shooting camera rather than trying to adapt like roll film for it. But as it turns out, one problem after another started happening, and I got to the point a couple weeks ago where I decided I'm putting this camera back on the shelf as a display-only decorator piece. But then I got the idea, you know, I think I can fix this and I think I can make it work. So this is the story of how I turned a failure into a success. Stay tuned. Well, the first thing I needed to do to make this into a usable camera is I had to make sure that it was light tight. And it clearly became obvious that it wasn't as soon as I disconnected the front part of the camera from the back and I shone a flashlight into it from around the outside. The bellows was about as light tight as a sieve. There was light leaks all over the place, and the fabric on this bellows is really old and worn out. I had thought about replacing the bellows, making a replacement bellows, but part of the challenge of doing that is the flange in the back where the rear of the bellows attaches to the camera is attached to the back with these really small rivets, and they're not standard pop rivets like you might find in a hardware store. So I'd have to drill them out, and I'd have to find this custom size rivet, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go to the trouble of remanufacturing the body just to be able to get the bellows replaced. So I did second best, which is I bought a spray can, an aerosol can of liquid electrical tape. This is a black, goopy, opaque substance that you spray on ostensibly for the purpose of insulating wires, but it works pretty good as a light, tight coating. It's sort of like Flex Seal, like a rubberized spray-on coating. It took me over a period of maybe 2 weeks here and there, because I'd have to spray a coat, let it dry, which takes a long time, and then you have to go shine the flashlight in there. Oh, there's another pinhole I missed. And it was a long and drawn-out process to get it to the point where the bellows was light tight. The second problem was the shutter. When it trips, it won't reclose. It'll like try to fire. You can see the blades try to move, but it won't close back down. I thought it was going to be something like needing to be degreased and cleaned. There's actually some parts in there that were broken and missing. Over a day of working on it, I decided I'm going to have to figure out a way to make a lens cap shutter. Well, I've done lens cap shutters before on cameras, box cameras or cameras with barrel lenses, but I was interested in using this camera though for doing selfies. That's a whole nother subject, but the reason why partly is because it's interesting to use yourself as a subject matter, but also if you're a photographic experimentalist, you might not have a subject around your house. But because of the angle of view of the camera, in order to get, a half torso shot or whatever, I'm going to need this camera to be further away from me than what I can reach. So in other words, if it was a wide angle lens, I could literally operate a lens cap shutter by hand within arm's reach. But it's not. It is a longer focal length, so I have to figure out how to operate this opening and closing the lens outside of my arm's reach, which is a real challenge. So last week I started doing some experiments, at least with still lifes, and I also had my wife operate a shutter. I made a crude shutter out of like foam core board, just a little cardboard kind of a thing that covers up the lens. And I discovered there's some light leaks in the camera. So this was one of the first successful pictures I made with it. You can see this fogging, this spot of light right here, fogged the picture. I also did another shot. This is actually a really nice shot of a tree. And again, this little spot. Then I did my wife operated the shutter on this one. And again, this spot right here, so I had 3 images that had this weird fogging. And so what it turned out to be was in the back of the camera, there is a door that you slide down, and that's where you use a stylus and scratch your name or words into the back of the film. That's the autograph feature. And light was coming through that door at an angle, and it was fogging the paper through this hole in the pressure plate. Normally, the roll film has a paper backing, a light-tight paper backing, so the film wouldn't normally see it. But because I was using photo paper negatives, there's no paper backing, and it was fogging it through the rear. I also had the last few tests I did last week, I started getting this weird fogging around the edge of the paper. I think it was something to do with the way the camera fits into the body. So this one side fits in like that, and then the other side, you lock it in place like that. And there's a little bit of play right here where the one half of the body fits onto the other half. And I think that was causing some fogging. And so what I've done today is I made this black paper sleeve that just fits down into the camera, and then the paper negative fits into this like a tray, and this is light tight paper, and the film size, or the size of the paper I'm using, is 3 inches by 5 inches. So I cut these to 3 by 5 inches, and it leaves a border around it, and that border is caused by the film gate itself. So we have a way to cure the light leaks from the body. I've fixed the bellows light leaks, but I still have to figure out how to make this lens have some kind of a shutter that I can open and then close, but do so outside of arm's reach. So as I began to think about this problem of how am I going to operate a shutter remotely on this camera, I don't have a mechanical shutter that I can use that can attach to it. How am I going to build a working shutter for that camera? I started thinking back that a few years ago, I saw a video about this photographer who is a tintype photographer, a large format wet plate collodion photographer named Borut Peterlin. And he's doing ultra large format tintype pictures of himself, selfie pictures in the forest. More recently, he's using a radio-controlled shutter that he built himself. But a few years ago, when I first saw his videos, he had this really simple way of, he had a lens cap over the barrel lens of his large camera, and he had a string attached to it. And then he had a flap situated above the lens with another string. So he had these 2 strings. So he would pull the lens cap off with one string, count out his exposure, and then pull the other string and flip the flap down, which would close the lens. So it was like a string-operated shutter. I thought, okay, a radio control shutter sounds a lot more high-tech and a lot cooler, but this idea of a mechanical shutter operated by a couple pull strings, if it's something as simple as me sitting in a chair in my backyard and I just want to get a selfie shot to test a camera or to try some exposure ideas on paper negatives, it sounds like maybe I can build a little simple shutter device that does that. And so what I started to do is I started to sketch some ideas in my sketch journal. So this was my initial sketch. I would have a little board that was made of maybe thin plywood that would fit across over the front ring of the lens. It would have 2 flaps that are hinged. The bottom flap would fall open and the top flap would fall shut. And then I kind of started doing some more sketches, and I came up with the idea of a little housing that has a circular disc, like a heavy weighted disc that falls in a slot. And there's a pin that holds it up like this. So you have a lens cap in front of here that you pull off with one string, and then you pull out a pin here, and this disc falls down in here to close the shutter and the exposure. So I kind of started building something based on this idea. So I have this little wooden piece, and it's going to have, the other half is going to cover it like that. And the way this works is this little opening in here is tapered, so the washer sits normally like that. So there's going to be a hole with a pin that holds the disc in place, and there's slack up here. And then these two rails get closer together, so down here it seats nice and snug and there's no movement, no play. So it'll basically, when you close the shutter, it falls like that. Of course, the disc will be opaque. It won't have a hole in it. And this will be the front of it, like something like that. It'll all be painted black on the inside. And then the back hole is going to mount onto the lens of the folding camera, with the only caveat that I didn't have a hole saw exactly the size of my camera's lens ring. So I have to do a little shimming, probably with some foam core board or something like that. But this will be kind of the basic shutter. You'll have a lens cap, kind of a disc covering it. You pull the string to remove it, and then you pull the second string to drop the closing disc. Ah, nice. So I need to make sure that the wooden piece doesn't obstruct the field of view. One of the best ways to make a makeshift view screen is with wax paper. And the camera is focused, sort of. So, with the bracket over the front, just trying to see, okay, if I angle it to the bottom, it looks like I get the bottom, the corners, and let's see the sky. It's hard to see, it's not as bright. It looks like we're good. Looks like it's not blocking the field of view. Okay. So before I start to paint the inside of this bracket black and glue on the other side, I need to get an adapter to fit onto the lens mounting ring so it would be nice and snug, because this whole thing has to sit on here without falling off. Well, okay, so I've built up enough gaff tape that maybe it will hold. Okay, so here is the lens mounted, and then the trick is going to be kind of just snugging the piece of plywood onto the lens ring around the gaff tape. It feels like it holds pretty well. Even at a less than upright vertical position, it falls nice and reliably and doesn't hang up. So I was going to use a wooden dowel pin as the release pin. I think I like the idea of brass on brass. So I have some of this K&S Engineering brass pieces. I have a rod here, and I have a tube that the rod fits nice and snugly in. Okay, so we have the brass sleeve on the outside. I have enough protruding out the front that I can put a bead of epoxy on there to hold it in place. And then the back side, it needs to be flush with the surface so that the washer will not be hung up by that when it slides down. So in theory, it'll operate something like this. So the inside of the sleeve is slightly recessed below the surface, so there's no chance of it causing the washer to hang up. And this is going to be a little sloppy, but let it harden. Alright, so let's do a little pull here. Ah, nice. Try to get it squared up. And then I'm going to do a little bit of peeking down in here with a flashlight to see if there's any glue seeping out. It looks like we're okay right now. Nice. Now I have to make the front lens cap that pulls off. Primitive, but that's the way this whole project has been. Primitive materials done by hand. So let's see how this works. 1001, 1002. Hey, we might have something here. Well, this kind of late afternoon light in the shade, basically sunny days on the north side of a house. I've really had a lot of luck taking portraits with exposure times about 2 seconds. These grade 2 paper negatives, I rate them somewhere around ISO 10 or 12. So I generally vary the exposure with the aperture and keep the shutter speed around 2 seconds, which I think is a good time because it's not so long that motion blur of the subject will become a problem, but it's not so short that you can't accurately time it. So if it was like a 1 second exposure, variations in how you count off 1 second could have significant differences in the way the exposure comes out, right? But for 2 seconds, I think it's a little more accurate to time it. So that's kind of a sweet spot. If you can get around 2 seconds, shaded daylight, these self-portraits are a lot of fun. And why would you want to do self-portraits? Is it because of vanity? Well, in my case, not really. It's because, well, maybe not the only reason. It's really because I don't have any other subjects. My wife is very self-conscious about portraits, herself, like a lot of people are. So I use myself as a subject in order to test out cameras, processes, different techniques. It's kind of a good thing to do if you're an experimentalist in these kinds of oddball forms of photography. In this case, reusing an old folding Kodak Autograph camera, bringing it back into the 21st century and finding new uses for it. I think that's a lot of fun. Okay, here goes. 1002. All right, I have the test negative in this tank. Okay, we're in the rinse after the fix. Pour that off. All right. Let's see what the results are. Oh, Joe likes. The tones are really good. So this is F11 at roughly 2 seconds, 1/1000, 2/1000, hand timed. Looks like my forehead's a little bright and shiny. It looks like I need makeup on my forehead, but overall I like it, and I don't see any evidence of the thin black threads in front of the lens. And you probably wouldn't see that because they'd be so out of focus, right? It came out really good. There's no light leaks, not even around the edge. Nice and sharp, so I judged my focal distance. Basically, I used my arm span to judge approximately 6 feet. So one hand adjacent to the lens, right, like that. The other hand where I'd be sitting, and then I figured I was about a foot or another 1.5 feet away, further than 6 feet. So then I set the focus scale on the camera. It has a 6 foot and an 8 foot and a 10 foot mark. So I set it between the 6 and the 8 foot for 7 feet. So it was actually pretty decent focus. I was really surprised, actually. My forehead is a little overexposed, but other than that, I'm surprised it's so good. Well, I was really happy the way this project came out. This little simple, elegantly simple mechanical falling disc shutter. Let me put it here. So that arms the closing part of the shutter. And this is the opening part. It's so cool being able to pop that off and then pop that and close it and time the shutter by hand. Such a simple device. I think just about anybody could build one of these for your particular camera. You just got to fit the ring, the front ring of the lens to fit snugly on a hole like this in this thin piece of wood. It's just amazing how well this worked. It's just elegantly simple, and I wish you guys would have fun making one of these yourselves. I guess I don't even know what you call this kind of a shutter, but I would imagine that these shutters have been around for 100 years or more, just from there's nothing new under the sun. have at it. Enjoy being creative, making camera stuff on your own. Homemade shutters for old primitive cameras, finding new uses for old cameras. It really is a great thing to do. Well, anyway, the lesson here is don't lose faith, don't lose hope. There's ways of turning these old cameras into paper negative portrait machines. And I'm really happy with the outcome I got. And I'm going to be using this camera again in the future, in the very near future, because I have more of these 3x5 pieces of paper cut up, and I have some chemistry I just poured up today that's not bad yet, so I'm going to get at it tomorrow and maybe shoot some more pictures of myself. It's the Infinite Joe series, as my friend Ethan Moses says. I hope you guys stay creative, and as always, have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.